equity, mate.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast that follows our journey of investing. Whether you're an absolute beginner or approaching Warren Buffett status, our aim is to help break down your barriers from beginning to dividend. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you?
I'm very good, Bryce. I'm very excited for this episode. We have got a company executive in the studio from overseas, flown all the way to Australia to speak to us, but a company that we're very closely tied to.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, it's one of our executive interview series episodes, and it is our pleasure to welcome to the studio Emily Villatte. Emily, welcome.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here.
So Emily is the Chief Financial Officer at Acast, the platform that we host our podcast with. The Equity Mates Network is hosted with Acast. I've kind of given away the first question, Emily, which is, can we always get our executives to describe the company in their own words? So how would you describe Acast?
Acast, in essence, is the world's biggest independent podcast company, and independence is important. I think it resonates with creators. We were founded in 2014, and ever since then we have been making podcasts available on every single listening app out there. And what we do is that we provide a marketplace. So for podcast creators, they come to us and we help them, or like you guys, find as big an audience as possible and then monetize the content. What I think is great for us is that we really align our incentives with the creators. So when the podcast creators are making money, we're making money. And we work with thousands of brands across the globe and finding that great match between audience, podcaster and an advertiser. And that's our business model. You know, right now we host around 88,000 podcasts. So you're in good company. And we put about 1.3 billion listens through our platform in Q3. So
wow.
we've grown a lot since 2014. We operate globally, but we have sort of a presence in market in 15 countries. And we're headquartered in Stockholm. Yeah, since inception, we actually paid out, you're not alone, we paid out just short of $200 million to podcast creators out there. So
nice.
We think it's really important.
So you mentioned there the word independent, and for those in the industry, you know, we know what that means. But for people listening at home trying to understand the industry, comparing, what do you mean by independent?
I mean, for us, it's very important that podcasters get to reach as big an audience as possible. So we're platform agnostic, and that's part of our independence. We distribute podcasts on every single listening app. So, you know, if you're listening to Equity Mates on Spotify or Apple Podcaster or Google Podcast, that's the app that I've got, and you hear an ad, then it's us helping that monetization and sharing revenue with the creators. So independence for us means that you as a creator can reach your full potential and reach the biggest audience, really.
Why Google Podcasts?
Well, Acast used to have a listener app, and I was on that one, of course. But we actually had a bit of a challenge with people understanding our business model. We're not an app company, and we want listeners to listen wherever they want to. So we actually closed down the app. So I had to move, and then I tried Google Podcasts, and I like it. It's quite good.
Really?
Yeah.
Can't say I've ever tried Google Podcasts, but I'm going to after this.
Yeah, you should.
So Acast founded in 2014, and if we think back to 2014 and we think of the podcast industry then, I'm sure Joe Rogan was probably the biggest, Mark Maron, Hamish and Andy in Australia, but there wasn't a lot. And, you know, you fast forward just 8 years and podcasting is now a giant business, and, you know, people are selling for tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, and there's a thriving ad ecosystem, and you guys have really been on that journey. Can you just talk us through how much has changed in that time? Yeah,
it's fascinating how much has changed. And when we started out, we started in Scandinavia, and then we expanded into the UK. And since then, now we're in 15 locations and operating globally. And during this time, and I think it's interesting now with the market that we're in right now, but if we go back 1 year between sort of 2014 and 2021, apart from a slight blip during COVID, podcasting has just been on this massive growth journey. And what's been fascinating to see as we've developed is that more and more advertisers have discovered the space, but they come after the audience. So the listeners come first, and they're always the early adopters. They get the medium and they love the format. And then advertisers take a little bit more time. So I guess it's a bit like print to digital in media. It took a while for the advertisers to actually follow the audience and spend money in, New York Times online as opposed to print. And it's the same journey that podcasting is on. And it's been a massive growth journey. And it's turning into a proper mass media right now. And I think that's important as well for brands. You have to have a certain reach and scale to be able to offer brands the targeting and the audience that they're after. So we've really been building the portfolio of podcasters that we work with. And the way we started in Europe was to go for some of the big publishing brands. So we work with, the BBC, The Economist, the FT, and The Guardian, and so forth. And it's been wonderful to work with these publishers. But actually, it's independent podcasters like yourselves who actually carry the bigger audience in terms of numbers. But advertisers often find it safe to start out with a well-known publisher and a well-known brand, but then they discover the power of the quite intimate conversation that podcasters are having with their audience, and actually also a really high ROI. So if you find that amazing match between the advertiser, the podcaster, and their audience, inserting your brand into that conversation carries such a high ROI for brands. And those who get it, they come back and they spend more. And I think right now in this market, we're actually seeing our Australia, New Zealand and international business, they're the part of the business that's been delivering the biggest growth in our last quarter. So the team are really leading the way right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
We should say that Acast is actually a listed company, if we haven't mentioned that already, but it is listed on the Stockholm exchange.
It's listed on NASDAQ, on the First North Premier Growth Market, and the ticker is Acast. So there you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
So it is down 85% since IPO, or since June 2021, been hit in the sell-off. What's the general sentiment? How are you talking to investors about that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride. So, you go back and you look at that downwards journey in terms of the share price. But what the public does not see is the upwards journey that we've had pre-listing. We were traded in the grey market in Stockholm for a number of years, but that is not something that the public can see. But clearly since the last year, we were listed the 17th of June 2021, and that was valuations for growth companies like ours were very solid at the time. So in terms of raising capital, I am so grateful that we have secured the company's balance sheet. We have a really solid balance sheet, lots of cash, and have that runway to take us through to profits. But the market has clearly changed, and we've seen investors and fund managers and capital allocators go from sort of focusing a lot on growth companies, and then for a while they were going into value, a few more months, and they're in cash now. So I just spent some time in London over the last, and different areas of Europe in the last few weeks, and I think the consensus right now among capital allocators in Europe, and of course that will change as quick as it's come out. But the recent consensus that is evolving is that H1 for 2023 will be focused on sort of maintaining a solid position in bonds or cash, in essence, and then H2 will be for equities. So we will see when the tides turn. But yeah, that's the latest gossip from the Europe capital allocators anyway. So
there's a perception that like it must have been tough to list there and then, to fall since. But you look back in history and some of the companies that survived, the .com bust, for example, we look at them as these great companies, but a lot of them happen to just raise at the right time. You know, PayPal and Amazon, 2 examples that raised within sort of like 6 months of the world going to hell in 2000, 2001. So in hindsight, maybe you guys raised at exactly the right time and gave yourself the maximum amount of runway. So putting the share price to one side, turning the market off, and actually just looking at the business, how's the business been going since it listed? What numbers you can, I know you can't share everything with us, but what can you share with us from not from a share market point of view, but from a business point of view?
Yeah, and I guess that is the interesting part. You know, the business has been doing really well since IPO, and during 2021 we delivered about 74% growth. And that was a beat on our expectations and on the market's expectations. So we were really happy with that delivery. And then we've come into a market, and the ad market is cyclical. So what we've seen is that the growth is still there, but it's from a lower baseline. So ad market for podcasting is still growing double digit, which is wonderful as parts of the world are heading into a recession. But the baseline for growth has come down. The appetite for focusing on growth from an investor perspective has come down. But the business is still doing really well. We're taking market share. We're dominating in the Nordics. We're dominating in the UK. And we have amazing reach and scale in the US. And we're really building our advertising proposition there as well. So it's we've done really well from a business perspective, but we're not immune to market sentiment. So what we've announced recently is that we're bringing forward our point of profitability to 2024, and like any business, we're looking at our cost line, we're looking at our resource allocation, we're looking at ROI for all of our projects and so forth. And I think you can't be immune to what's going on in the market either. You have to adapt as well.
So you said you have 88,000 podcasts on the platform. I think there was a stat we came across not too long ago that kind of freaked us out, which was like there's a new podcast, or there's 5 new podcasts every minute, or 1 every 5, something ridiculous like that. Where is podcasting? You know, YouTube 20 years ago, it's obviously now massive. Where do you see the podcast adoption now, and is there too many podcasts?
I mean, there are loads of podcasts, but what we've been really good at doing is attracting those podcasts who actually have great commercial value. And that's not every podcast. There are some hobby podcasters who there are platforms where you record a sound and it becomes a podcast. But we're really after those podcasters who have some ambition, who add commercial value, and who are great for brands to work with. So sometimes there will be numbers thrown around where we have millions of podcasts. We believe that the sort of the sphere for how many podcasts are suited for brand advertising will be in the hundreds of thousands rather than the millions. So I think it's a long tail, and we've been really good at focusing on some of the larger podcasts, but also that the heart of the industry, those independent podcasters with an audience that is growing but has a really dedicated audience and offer amazing ROI for advertisers. So I think for us that's a really sweet spot.
100,000 podcasts competing with that we're competing with for briefs still sounds like a lot.
Does sound like a lot, but I think there's like 155 million YouTube channels.
Wow.
something ridiculous. So if you compare that to 88,000 podcasts on Acast, of course, there's probably another 88,000 on many other, probably not quite as many, but it feels like if you follow a YouTube adoption, or there's still heaps to come. Heaps to come. Not that they're all going to be commercial, but yeah.
Now we want to pick your brain a little bit about just the podcasting industry in general, where you think it's going, because it's rare we get a chance to sit down with someone who lives and breathes podcasting as much as you. And there's a few threads to pull at. Bryce mentioned YouTube, so maybe the one thing that it seems that YouTube has over podcasting right now is discoverability. I feel like there's so many great podcasts out there that you just never cut through. And Bryce and I help produce some podcasts in the Equity Mates Network that we want to get in front of more people. Where do you think discoverability is going? And do you think we're going to get like a Netflix of podcasting one day where the algorithm learns you and recommends things to you?
It's possible of course, for algorithms to learn your behavior and your preferences. And actually, in August, we bought a company that's called Podchaser. And they are like the IMDb for podcasts. So they have the millions, all of the podcasts on their database. And they have the best metadata in the industry on all of the podcasts, the hosts, the guests, and so forth. And their data engine is really powering discoverability on the web for podcasts. But one of the most powerful or common ways to discover podcasts is still word of mouth. So, the technology still has a way to go to solve this conundrum for people. But this is also why we bought Podchaser, because we saw that opportunity and we recognized that, when you have the best data in the industry on all of the podcasts, and we've also built a lot of really sophisticated ad targeting and ad tech in the background since we started in 2014, you're in quite a good position. But we acknowledge that is a trend or a conundrum that has not been fully solved, neither by the apps or in other formats. But that's the opportunity to continue to do that, of course.
Yeah, it feels like Spotify is probably out in front of that, but it's still, their recommendations still just are never quite bang on for me.
Yeah, and I think maybe as a listener, it's such a big commitment to listen to a podcast. So actually, it's a big hurdle to actually commit and listen to a whole show. And if you get a recommendation that is not suited for you, you're not going to listen to that show, even if it pops up, because it's such a big commitment. So people are still making up their own mind as to what they want to listen to and what they feel is good content. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I get choice paralysis. I open up my podcast app, they all appear, and I just go, nah.
Too much.
Too much. No. I'll just leave my headphones at home. Too much.
So I think for people listening in Australia, where the podcast market is a little bit more fragmented and the radio companies are really trying to make a play into the podcast space, they might not recognise how dominant Acast is in Europe, and particularly in the UK we hear a lot about. It's something like, 90% of podcasts over there are on Acast? Is that?
I mean, it's not far off. We do have the majority of the market. We have between 50 and 70% of the top charts in Sweden and the UK. And in terms of advertising, we have the majority of the ad dollars in those markets as well. So we're actually quite big. And even in the US, if we set the ad dollars aside in terms of reach and scale, we reach 22 million unique listeners in the US every single month. And I'd say we're in the top 3 when it comes to reach and scale of audience in the US. So I think we're punching above our weight when people perceive us. We're actually quite big.
Yeah, at some point you're going to have to recognize that you guys are big. Like, you're the giants. Yeah. But what happened in Australia? Why has the Australian market developed differently to some of the other markets?
Every market is coming from a different position. And, Australia, whilst it is fragmented, you do have those legacy radio players that have a solid position. And we've been waiting to see when they were going to discover this wonderful medium. And I think it's just recently that they are actually coming to the table. But I think for us, it's a case of a rising tide lifts all boats. We've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in the US when Spotify and other big players have been discovering this medium and promoting it. Since we're in such a growing market, it helps all of the players within it. So for us, it's great that the likes of ARN and Nova and so forth, and SEA are in the game. It raises the awareness of the medium for all. And I think that's the biggest hurdle, just getting advertisers to try out the medium, figure out how to do a great podcast ad, because it's different to a radio ad, work with great creators who do good host reads. I love your host reads. I think they're amazing.
Not paid.
Not paid at all. But that's the big challenge, just getting brands to discover the medium. And that's so exciting in Australia, because right now we're seeing some of the spearheading and momentum across our business coming from Australian brands really stepping up their game and looking into how they can best use podcasting as a medium.
So for someone sitting at home that is thinking, I want to start a podcast, putting you on the spot, but what category has the most podcast in it or is most saturated? And then also what categories are demanding the most from advertising dollars?
All right. There is a lot of true crime out there.
Yes.
It's because it's very popular. So I wouldn't say if you've got an amazing true crime story, put it in your back pocket. No, go and do it, of course. If you have a great story to tell, then put it out there. And you got to talk about what you're passionate about. So you got to find your niche. But categories that are always really well performing, if you want to branch out, parenting. It's an amazing segment. There's always more demand for great parenting podcasts. So that would be my top recommendation if you're keen on branching out.
Our circle of confidence.
Put you on the spot.
Parenting. How do you parlay finance into parenting?
Well, it's one of the most impactful events on your finances.
But
True.
Investing for kids.
Investing for kids,
True. Long-term investing.
Yeah. Okay, take this offline.
But business is great as well. Business and finance is a category that always performs.
Too saturated.
Well,
No one else should get in that category.
Parenting. That's the one.
Well, Emily, before you said you really liked our host reads, we're going to take a quick break so you can listen to one now.
Oh, brilliant.
So, Emily, before the break, we were talking about the journey of Acast and then a little bit about the podcast industry. When we have an executive on from a company, we love to talk about what matters and what doesn't, because Bryce and I are from a retail background, and there were some metrics that really mattered in that industry: sales per square meter, same-store sales, that the retailers really looked at and really understood. And we love to understand what those metrics are in other industries. So in podcasting, in audio, in hosting and ad sales, I don't know how you define the industry that Acast sits in. In media is probably what I should have said. What metrics matter and what doesn't?
For us, we're operating a two-sided marketplace where we have the podcasters on one side, sort of representing the supply side in the marketplace, and then we have the advertisers representing the demand side. And we look at quite similar metrics for both sides. So if we look at the podcasters, like how many shows are coming in, how many listens do they have, are we growing their listens over time, how much money are we paying out per listen, how good are we at monetizing? So average revenue per listen, and listens are stats that we post every quarter, and average revenue per listen is a really important one because it measures not only how good we are at delivering revenue for Acast, but it's also a proxy for how good we are at making good on our promises to podcasters and paying them out. And ultimately, unless we're growing that metric over time, then we're not going to be successful. So that's something that we look really closely at. And then of course, what's our churn? Are we losing listeners? Are we losing podcasters? And for what reason? And then on the other side of the marketplace, we have the advertisers. So same thing. Are we getting new advertisers? What's their average ticket? How much are they spending? Are they coming back? How is the medium spend going? Are we seeing advertisers coming in spending a test budget of 5,000 Aussie dollars? Are they coming back and spending 50,000 Aussie dollars, and then they come back and spend 500,000? I mean, we're seeing those trends because the advertisers who come back who get it really come back and double down and increase their spend. So we look at that, of course. So those are sort of the fundamentals of the marketplace. And then in this market, of course, we're looking really carefully at all of our scalability metrics. So what's our looking right down to the bottom line and our scaling per FTE, revenue per FTE, and gross profit per FTE. Or gross margin is a very important health metric for us as well.
So I remember my days at Woolies when you'd do a report and then the execs would be on the earnings call spewing about the commentary they're getting in the AFR from analysts. Are there any metrics that you see discussed in relation to Acast that you think are just useless or it's just shouldn't be discussed?
Well, I think for us, the challenge is not metrics being discussed that are not relevant. It's the market starting to understand the business of podcasting in more detail. It is a new media, and to your point, about competition, it's great to be a pioneer and sort of be one of the very few listed pure play podcasting businesses, but you also don't have many relevant comps. So there's less understanding of the space in the market. So you have to spend a lot of time on educating the market around how podcasting works. So anyone talking about podcasting, regardless of the metric, I'm very happy with.
Now, speaking of not having many comps, the closest proxy might be Spotify, but it's quite a different business. But Spotify and Acast get grouped together because they're also from what we have labelled the home of audio, Stockholm, because it seems that every good audio business comes out of Stockholm. Not only Acast and Spotify, but also in the finance space, there's a business that we're really impressed by, a bit smaller than you guys, Quarter, that are doing some really interesting stuff with finance earnings calls as well. So what's in the water in Stockholm? Why are audio businesses seeming to only come out of one city in Europe?
Stockholm has always been a place of early adoption of new technology. So the Stockholm exchanges are full of amazing tech companies who have gone on these growth journeys, and I think we're a great market to test things out. The audience there is very keen to test out these new formats and so forth. I love Quarter as well. It's a lovely business. Spoke with Danny, was in the office the other day.
Oh, there you go.
So it's just a space where innovation is very frequent, and audio has been a great space for us.
We like to understand management because as investors, it's one of the key pillars of an investment thesis. Management, what's their view on the company? How do they approach it? How do you define your leadership philosophy?
My leadership philosophy? Gosh, for a CFO, I'm so stuck in the numbers that anytime I get to get out of my spreadsheet, I'm very happy. But I think right now in this market, you are tested as a leader, having done an IPO and wearing the weight of the market as you come out of that, and people watching you and the staff watching the performance in the market as well, and wondering how we're impacted. I think it's really important to not duck the hard questions. I try to be as transparent as I can be. And I got some really good advice not long ago, and they said, Emily, even in this market, you have to tell the story like it is. You can't come with ideas or thoughts or things that are not anchored in reality. Right now, we're in a shaky market, and we have to go out and tell our story. I try to be very present in the market right now, even though people sort of feel, isn't it hard to go out there and speak with investors right now? No, you just got to go out there and see people and continue telling your story, because we have an amazing story, and the teams out there working in our different markets, in our tech and product team as well, they're doing amazing work. So you're sending the wrong signal if you're just sort of going away and ducking the questions. You have to be out there. You have to speak with people. You have to speak with investors. You have to speak to the staff and be quite present, accountable, and available. So I think that's where I'm at right now.
Speaking of the staff, you said you're in 15 countries at the moment, and I'm sure there's more on the horizon. We'd love for you guys to get to India. Actually, we'd love to get some ads in there, try and grow Equity Mates India. Side note.
Wonderful, taking notes.
But growing a team, growing a company across all these different geographies must be pretty hard. I know you have a camp once a year. We hear great stories from the Acast team. But what's it been like growing the company, and in particular growing a culture when you really are a global business?
I think it's something that a lot of companies are reflecting on right now, having come out of COVID, and particularly in tech. We operate a hybrid or remote first work in parts of our business, but you do sometimes have to get together to build a culture and make people feel connected to what we're trying to achieve. So it's a balancing act, but it's something we've been working on for years. And we were speaking earlier around how we operate not just a global business, but a leadership team that's spread out. So the leadership team right now is spread between Stockholm, London, and New York. So we've always operated across different time zones and catching up on those Zoom calls, but we do try and catch up regularly to make sure that we stay on the same page. So I think it's a mix. You do have to have that IRL experience and make sure that you communicate and stay really connected and over communicate. I mean, it's hard with all of the flows on Slack and Messenger and email to pick up on all of the nuances. So you just have to keep talking to people and make sure that your message is getting across. And sometimes stop talking and start to listen. That's another approach.
I need an internal company podcast on a private feed.
We do release our earnings call as a podcast, of course. So that's a company podcast we have right now. But we catch up all the time as a group and as a company, which is great.
Nice.
Well, Emily, we always finish with the same final 3 questions for all of our executives. So the first of which is, what does the next 12 months look like and what does it hold for Acast?
So the next 12 months will be an interesting ride because in different parts of the globe, we're heading into different times of economic opportunities and challenges. Right now, as of the Q3 results, we had fantastic growth in Australia, New Zealand, and our international markets. We've seen some slowing down of the growth in Europe and in the Americas. So 2023 and the coming 12 months for us will all be about setting ourselves up to deliver profits in 2024. So we are going to look at making the right bets in terms of how we innovate, what we prioritize in our tech and product roadmap, and supporting our sales and market operations in keeping podcasters happy, making sure that we're monetizing and then improving our monetization capabilities. So that's what 2023 is all about, setting ourselves up for scale and then delivering profits in 2024. Yeah, bottom line.
Easy. Sounds easy.
Thinking about risks for Acast, what would you say the biggest risk is at the moment?
The biggest risk right now is the macro environment. We don't set the advertising budgets of the big brands. They are set with lots of external metrics that influence them. So right now we have to stay very close to what the macroeconomic environment is doing and adapt to the pace of growth that we see.
I think that's felt across the board for sure. We've just spoken about 12 months, but what about in 10 years' time? What does Acast look like and what does success mean for you in 10 years?
I mean, in 10 years' time, we will finally be at the spot where we've come to this tipping point of where the default audio buy is a podcast ad buy, not a radio ad buy. We will have come to that tipping point. I mean, right now, between 25 and 30 billion US dollars are being spent in commercial audio across the globe, half of that in the US. So in 10 years' time, we will be at that point where the default option is the podcasting ad, and where the market really understands the power of the medium and advertisers get their ROI, they get their attribution. We've improved the stats transparency and metrics. But the stats are great. I mean, we know the stats and we know that attribution and ROI for advertisers is really high. And as we improve our technology and push through on innovation, we will continue to see more money flow into the space. So that's where we will be. Podcasting will be the default option.
Yeah. I mean, the stats are great because when a podcast is downloaded, it's downloaded and that's recorded. Yeah. Radio is a analog survey where a few select people get asked if they listen to the radio and we extrapolate from there. But anyway,
it's
another
fascinating. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, one final question. Given that you work in the podcast industry people listening are already podcast listeners. Word of mouth is the best way to discover new podcasts. So to close us out, do you have a podcast recommendation?
Oh, I mean, I do, of course, listen to Equity Mates.
We'll take that as given that they're listening.
I do listen to a range of different podcasts. I do love Osher's podcast in Australia. I think it's a really important podcast, Better Than Yesterday with Osher Günsberg. I think it's got a really important message around mental health and looking after yourself and pushing through all of the changes that we've seen, in personal and business life. So I think that's, it's a well-known podcast here, but I love it. I listen to it regularly.
Yeah, Osher. So we were at the Australian Podcast Awards last week, and Osher was the belle of the ball. He was the celebrity of all celebrities in the podcast world. So.
Oh, but you won Best Business Podcast.
We did.
Thank you for reminding us.
Yes. we weren't quite brave enough to speak to him, so maybe next year. But anyway, Emily, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for flying all the way from Stockholm just to speak with us. We really do appreciate it. Kidding, you didn't do that for those listening at home. But it is it's great to meet you, and Acast have been a great supporter of what Equity Mates have been doing. So it's been great to unpack it today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.